The following tale is plucked from the pages of a nameless tome, a manuscript whispered of in hushed tones by those who dare tread too close to the edge of sanity. It is said that merely speaking of the events you are about to hear invites danger beyond reckoning. For these are the deeds and misdeeds of souls whose fates were sealed the moment they crossed into shadowed realms where darkness reigns eternal. Be warned, listener, do not repeat what you hear to others. Do not commit these words to memory, nor linger on the images conjured within your mind. To do so is to risk incurring the wrath of, well, perhaps it is best if I leave the name unspoken. Even now, it claws at the corners of my mind. Know this, should you choose to continue, you do so at your own peril. And remember, you have been warned. This tale is called The Last Broadcast. The vast expanse of space was cold and dark, the Arcadius drifting silently toward the derelict station. Its lights blinked softly against the void, a lone beacon as it approached the once thriving colony hub. Captain Elaine Bradshaw stood on the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on the looming silhouette of the station. It had been over a decade since the colony had gone dark, and no one could explain why a distress signal had suddenly blared to life, echoing across the galaxy. The crew had been briefed before departure. They were to dock, investigate, and report back. Standard rescue protocol. Yet, as they drew closer, a gnawing unease spread among them. The station, appearing ghostly against the backdrop of stars, was bathed in shadows, its external lights long dead. Are we sure this is the right place? Chief Engineer Logan Mason muttered, his brow furrowed. This station was supposed to be abandoned. Power should have been cut off years ago. It is, First Officer Paul Francis confirmed, glancing at the console. But that distress signal is real. Someone, or something, activated it. Captain Bradshaw remained silent, but her mind was racing. There had been no scheduled activity on the station, no missions, no reason for anyone to be there. Yet, as they slowly maneuvered into the docking bay, a crackling whisper crept through their comms, sending shivers down their spines. Help us. The message was faint, distorted, as if coming from far away. Captain Bradshaw's eyes narrowed. Mason, I want a status report on the docking mechanism. If there's any sign of sabotage, I need to know. Mason nodded, but his face betrayed his unease. The air in the bridge felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if they had just taken their first step into a long-forgotten crypt. Captain, Dr. Lillian Carter said, her voice soft but urgent. We should proceed with caution. If there are survivors, they might not be entirely stable. Captain Bradshaw nodded, though her jaw tightened. We dock, we investigate, and we get out. Stay alert. She glanced around the bridge, catching the uneasy gazes of her crew. Let's make this quick. As the Arcadius latched onto the station's airlock, the crew prepared to enter the unknown, each one trying to shake off the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The airlock hissed as it opened, revealing a dark corridor that led deeper into the station. Flashlights flickered on, cutting through the pitch black, but the light seemed almost swallowed by the shadows, barely illuminating the path ahead. The team moved in a tight formation, Captain Bradshaw at the front, with Mason, Dr. Carter, and Francis close behind. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional drip of water and the faint hum of machinery that hadn't been turned off in years. Where is everyone? Francis whispered, scanning the dimly lit walls. There were no signs of life, no sound of footsteps, no distant echoes of voices. The station felt like a tomb, cold and desolate. Dr. Carter shivered. I don't like this, she muttered. It's too quiet. Captain Bradshaw remained focused, but she could feel the tension rising among her crew. She knew they were all thinking the same thing. If there were survivors, where were they hiding? And if not, who activated the distress signal? As they reached the central control room, Mason managed to access the station's system. The monitors flickered to life, revealing a chaotic array of data. Frantic messages, warning lights, and corrupted files filled the screen, painting a picture of panic and desperation. "These logs, they're scrambled," Mason said, his voice strained. "But it looks like there was a massive power surge right before everything shut down. Something must have caused it. Can you find out what?" Bradshaw asked, her tone clipped. "Maybe, but it'll take some time." Mason's hands moved swiftly over the controls, trying to piece together the fragmented data. Then, out of nowhere, the monitors went dark, replaced by a single, ominous message, "Leave." "What the hell?" Frances breathed, taking a step back. Dr. Carter looked around, her heart pounding. "We should turn back." "No," Captain Bradshaw said, her voice firm. "We press on. Something's wrong here, and I intend to find out what." The crew hesitated, but their captain's resolve was unyielding. Reluctantly, they followed as she led them deeper into the station, unaware that the shadows behind them had begun to move, creeping closer, silent and hungry. The crew's flashlights danced over the darkened walls as they made their way to the power core. The air was stale, thick with the smell of metal and something else, something rotten. Captain Bradshaw could feel her pulse quicken, a sense of dread clawing at her, but she refused to let it show. As they neared the core, Mason stopped abruptly, shining his light ahead. "Captain, you need to see this." Bradshaw stepped forward, her eyes widening. The room was a mess of twisted metal and shattered glass, but what caught her attention was the massive tear in the air, like a jagged wound. It pulsed with a sickly, dark energy, warping the space around it. "What is that?" Dr. Carter whispered, unable to tear her eyes away. "A rift," Mason said, his voice trembling. "I've seen reports of anomalies like this, but never one this large." Bradshaw approached cautiously, feeling a cold wind emanating from the tear. "It's some kind of portal, but to where?" Before anyone could answer, the rift pulsed, sending a wave of energy through the room. The crew staggered, clutching their heads as whispers filled the air, voices overlapping, each one dripping with malice. "You shouldn't be here." Captain Bradshaw gritted her teeth, trying to drown out the noise. "We need to shut this down," she said, her voice barely audible over the whispers. "Mason, can you disable it?" Mason nodded shakily, moving toward the control panel. But as he did, the shadows began to shift, twisting and contorting, forming into dark, indistinct shapes. The crew watched in horror as the shadows slowly took form, revealing distorted, eyeless faces staring back at them. "What the hell are those things?" Francis gasped, raising his weapon. "They're not real," Dr. Carter said, though her voice was weak, as if trying to convince herself. "They can't be." But the shadows didn't disappear. Instead, they moved closer, their mouths twisting into cruel, mocking smiles. "You came, because we called." The crew froze, the weight of fear pressing down on them. One of the shadow figures, taller and more defined than the others, stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. Its eyeless gaze locked onto Communications Officer Farrow, who stood trembling at the back of the group. "No, stay away!" Farrow shouted, stumbling back, but the shadow lunged, moving faster than humanly possible. Its hand, dark and claw-like, reached out, wrapping around Farrow's throat. "Help him!" Francis yelled, but no one could move. They were rooted in place, paralyzed by the sheer terror of the moment. The shadow's grip tightened, and Farrow's screams echoed through the room, a sound of pure agony. The creature's hand began to glow, searing through his skin, and as it did, his body convulsed, his flesh melting, disintegrating into a pool of dark, viscous liquid. Dr. Carter turned away, tears streaming down her face. "We need to get out of here." Captain Bradshaw's mind was reeling, but she forced herself to focus. "No, we need to shut this down. It's the only way." But as she spoke, the rift pulsed again, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "You can't escape." The crew's panic escalated, and their movements became frantic and erratic. Captain Bradshaw barked orders, trying to regain control, but the shadows were relentless, closing in, and their laughter echoed through the room. Mason rushed to the control panel, his hands trembling as he desperately tried to disable the rift generator. "Just a little longer, come on," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the chaos. But before he could finish, one of the shadows lunged at him, its claws sinking into his chest. Mason's eyes widened, his mouth opening in a silent scream as the creature dragged him into the rift, his body vanishing in an instant. The shadows turned their attention to the others, circling them like predators. Dr. Carter was the next to fall. Her screams were cut short as the shadows enveloped her, pulling her into the dark void. Captain Bradshaw's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "Francis, cover me," she shouted, sprinting toward the console. But when she looked back, she realized with horror that Francis was gone, his form swallowed by the shadows. With her crew gone, Captain Bradshaw was alone, facing the dark, empty room. She could barely see the console through the tears that blurred her vision, but she forced herself to keep going, her hands shaking as she input the shutdown sequence. But before she could finish, a voice echoed from behind her, soft and mocking. "You can't save them, and you can't save yourself." Bradshaw turned, her breath catching in her throat. The shadows parted, revealing a figure stepping through the rift, its form identical to hers. It wore her face, her uniform, but its eyes were dark and empty, devoid of any warmth or humanity. The creature smiled, a cold, eerie smile, and spoke in her voice, "Thank you, for bringing the ship." As the real Captain Bradshaw tried to respond, the entity lunged, its form distorting, and with a sickening snap, she was torn apart, her remains dragged into the rift. The entity, now wearing Captain Bradshaw's form, calmly exited the control room, making its way to the Arcadius. The station fell silent, the shadows retreating back into the rift, leaving only a cold, empty void behind. As the Arcadius undocked, drifting away from the abandoned station, a new signal was broadcast, echoing through the void. "We're coming. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this tale. I truly hope you enjoyed the story and felt fully immersed in its world. If you did, please hit that like button, turn on notifications, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future stories filled with adventure, suspense, and mystery. And if you want more thrilling tales right now, click the video link at the top of your screen. The shadows hold many more tales. Don't miss the next one, subscribe and join me for the next dark adventure.